Hey guys, Snipe 86K here. I'm gonna do a build for my in-laws. Their computer's getting kind of old and need a new one, so we're gonna build them this one. Start off going over all our parts. We got the Thermaltake VL8000 here. Nice case. We've got the Asus M5A78L-M LE motherboard that we're putting a AMD Phenom 2 3 gigahertz processor into. We're going to power all this with the Corsair 500 watt bronze certified. We've got our 1 terabyte WD blue hard drive here. We've got some Kingston HyperX down there. Disk drive, the Logitech K120, and an Acer G22 HQL 60 Hz 21.5 inch monitor. Now we don't have a mouse here because they didn't need one. They've already got one with their old PC. But we're going to go ahead and get all this unboxed and we'll see you then. So we'll get in here and pull out all our extra pieces.
Good boy. Oh, you want your coat off? Take your coat off. Yeah.
Next, we will put in the risers for our motherboard. Okay, go ahead and stop it there. Alright, so the best way to judge on how to, which risers you're going to need in here, because there's plenty, is to take your motherboard while it's still in its anti-static bag and just kind of set it in here. You look through the bag because they're kind of see-through. And you see where the holes for the screws are. There's one here, 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 and here. So we go ahead and pull this back out and we can see that we've already got pre-done risers that are just in the case here, here, and here. And we're gonna have to add one here and here. So we take our little riser and we stick it there, screw it in. And we get another one out of our handy dandy bag of screws. And we put it in here. And then next we will take our I/O shield and clip it into the I/O slot. So the best way to figure out which way to put this in is to, again, grab your motherboard bag and line up what you need where. And then you just stick it into a slot. And it doesn't take much pressure, and it just kind of clips in there. Just like so. Alright, so next step is to put in the motherboard. And you slide it in here like so. Sometimes you've got to bend some of these tabs just a little to get it to fit right. But basically you line everything up on the I/O shield to the motherboard. And then you push it in. And then on this particular case, it's got this piece here that once you've got it hooked on there, it should be about right. And then you can go on to putting the screws in all the other holes.
Would you point to that piece again? I zoomed in so they can see what that piece was that you pointed to.
Which piece?
The one that's attached to the case that hooked into the motherboard.
Here's the riser right here.
Okay, just so that way they know what you were talking about, if they happen to have that same problem.
All right, so then we move on to screws. Not those ones. Should be these ones. Sometimes these are kind of hard to get in just because of the things that are on the motherboard. That's the wrong piece. I like to just barely snug them to start with. And then I'll come through and tighten them all once they're all snug. It's extremely helpful to have a magnetic screwdriver. I do not, however. And sometimes you've got to push on the motherboard a little harder to get it to line up with the hole better. So this is our last screw for this one. And then we'll move on to putting this power supply in and running some cables. So we're going to go through and tighten up the screws like I mentioned earlier. Just make sure they're good and snug. You don't want to over tighten them because you could crush the motherboard. There we are. We'll move on to the power supply. So generally I like to mount my power supplies with the fan facing upwards towards the motherboard. However, with the side the wires are coming out of this time, I'm going to go ahead and mount it upside down to what I would normally do so that it's going to sit in there like so. However, on this case, it has this little bracket screwed in by these two screws that I'm going to have to take out to get the power supply in. So I'll just go ahead and unscrew these two. And this little corner bracket comes out. Set those aside. I'll turn the case up so you guys can see better. I'll take the power supply. Set it in there. Slide it in just like so. And the power supply comes with its own set of screws for mounting it. It also comes with some zip ties for cable management later on. power supplies, you would want to screw them in about like you would a car tire or a car wheel, and do sort of a star as you tighten them. So we'll just get that sort of started. Move on to the next one. Get it started. Next one. Get it started. Sometimes the holes and screw holes and everything don't quite line up, so you kind of got to push stuff around. But can't really break anything doing that. So now that they're all started, I'll go ahead and tighten them up. We'll start on this corner. We'll go across, caddy corner. Tighten this one up. Then we'll move to this one. Tighten it up. And move to the last one. And there should be 4 screws generally for a power supply. Alright, so now we need to go ahead and take this screw and this screw off to pull off the side panel and run our cords through to the other side. So I'll just pull that off, set it aside. And then we can take our cords and unbundle them. Well, you guys can't see it, but it's just a twisty tie, so nothing big. So we take them and fish them all through this hole. And get them sitting the way we want them. Then I'm going to go ahead and take one of these zip ties and run it around all these cables. And then I'm going to run the other end through this riser hole. Actually, I think I'll go around the whole prefab riser and just tie them up so they stay there and don't try and come back into the case. Just like so. So now we can take and put our little L bracket back on for our power supply here. And you can just set it on the corner, slide it down, and stick its screws back in there. If you've got the room, it's always nice to start the screws by hand to make sure you've got them threaded properly, because you can't just run down to your local auto repair shop and get new ones or anywhere else. So from there we will go ahead and set our CPU in. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and take our processor here. There will be a box will come with it. That's your cooling system. Some instructions, we can just throw those away. And the processor, the important part. Now, the biggest thing with processors is they've got all these really tiny pins, and if you bend one, you've ruined the processor. There's not really fixing it generally. So when you're doing it, you got to be really careful, and it goes into this big gray pad right down here. And first things first, we'll take this little metal bar here, unclip it, and slide it all the way till it's pointing up. And then we're going to look at our processor, and on one of the four corners it'll have a little solid gold, gray, it depends on the processor, but it'll have a little triangle on there. So this solid white triangle here matches up with this solid gold triangle on the CPU. So we'll go ahead and open this, pick this up by its sides, get the plastic out of the way, and all we do is gently drop it in there. And then if you really want to make sure it's in there good, you can wiggle it a little bit each way just to make sure it's in there. And all we do is slide this down and clip it, and you've installed your CPU. The next step will be to put a dot of thermal paste on the top here. Generally, CPUs on the fans will come with thermal paste on here. Personally, I don't suggest using it. I buy a nicer thermal paste, it's really cheap. So we'll go ahead and cut. We'll clean this off of here, and I'll show you that process in a minute. Alright, so to clean off the thermal paste that comes on these, just use some rubbing alcohol and a napkin, or generally I use paper towels, but I am out. So you pull this guy off, and that gray square here is the thermal paste, so we'll just stick some alcohol on our napkin here, and we'll rub this stuff off. Go ahead and switch to a clean side. And get some more of this off. Pretty simple. Alright, so now comes the step of putting thermal paste onto our CPU and putting our cooler on. My preferred brand is Arctic MX4 thermal compound, and this tube so far it's done 3 CPUs and I still have plenty left to go. So let me just take our cap off. And we take and stick about a pea-sized drop right in the center of our CPU. Close that up, set it aside. Then we take our CPU fan and we use this and this to clamp it onto the CPU. Keep in mind on how you're going to run your wire to your CPU fan plug, and that'll be labeled on the motherboard which one is actually specifically for the CPU. So I am going to set mine in like this so that the cord is basically managed all on its own. So we're going to take set the cooler right on the center, and we kind of push down and wiggle just a little bit to kind of spread out the thermal paste. And we take this in and clip it onto that center. We do the same thing on the other side. Without this side flopping off, of course. It does take a little bit of pressure to get it down. Get that set on there, and you take this little black clip and you flip it over to the other side, just like so. We run our fan along the edge, and this fan has little grooves that line up with a tab that is on the motherboard plug, and we just slide it right onto the plug, and that's hooked up. Just like that. Now we can move on to mounting our hard drive and our CD reader. Alright, so I forgot about the RAM. So we're gonna go ahead and open up our RAM and stick it in there. This can just go away. So there's a little notch on our RAM that lines up with a little notch on the plug in the motherboard. These are also labeled A1 and B1. Generally, if you're only running one stick of RAM like we are in this build, you're gonna stick it in A1. Clip these little white clips here, open them up. You slide it in the slot and just push down till you hear it click on both ends. That puts that piece in, and now we can move on to the hard drive and the CD drive. Alright, so we're gonna move on to putting our CD drive in up here. This, we're gonna have to pull the front face off. It's got little clips. There's 3 of them. One's up in there. And that's on each side. Those are, so we're gonna have to squeeze them and mess with them to get this front end to unclip. The best way is to start on one side, get it started.
Have little fingers.
They can be difficult sometimes. There we go. Just wiggle it off. Okay, and then we're putting the CD or the CD drive in this top slot here. So we're gonna unclip the top screen on the front. It's just got little plastic clips on both sides holding it in. That can go away, so that part is ready. We take our CD drive and make sure we've got it face up. We unclip these, and on this case you just turn this and it comes undone. You have to do that on both sides. Oh, maybe not. There's not one on the other side. So then you take your drive and slide it in. Oh, we'll go this way. Not over the other way. Just slide it into place. Line up the holes. You take your clip. And stick it in there. And turn it to lock it in. And that should be it. And then you can go ahead and clip your face plate back onto the front of the tower. After that, you just line up the holes and clip them in. Just like so. So now, I can set it back on its side again. And we'll go ahead and put our hard drive in as well. And it works basically the same way. You unclip the clip. Go ahead and open our anti-static bag. And before you pull this out, it's always a good idea to either have a grounding bracelet or touch the case to make sure you get rid of any static electricity. And you take your hard drive, you slide it in the bay you want it in. You do want to make sure all the plugs are facing the motherboard. Line up your holes, stick your clip in, turn it and lock it, and it's in place. Alright, so now we're moving on to cords. The first one we're going to plug in is the motherboard's power supply. It'll go into this one. And then we're going to plug in the CPU power supply into this little blue clip way up here. So, you take this, and it's got a clip on one side that'll line up with a tab on the plug. So again, you just line it up, push till you hear it click, and that's it. Now this CPU plug has a separator here if it were running a larger CPU. So all we got to do is separate the two, and it's just these two little black tabs on either side. But we only need to plug in one of these, and it doesn't matter which one, they are both the same. Alright, so I took the motherboard off real quick and ran the cord up over behind it and over the top of it to plug into this plug here. So we'll go ahead and plug it in. Now these cords can be kind of stiff. You just kind of gotta mess with them to get them to cooperate. And again, you just push it in lightly until you hear it click. So that puts our motherboard power on and our CPU power. Next, we will run power to both of our hard drive as well as our CD drive. And as long as you've got a lengthy enough cable, you should be able to use just one cable for a setup this small to plug in both. So you just push them on there and there, and that plugs in the power. And then your motherboard should come with the data cables, or SATA cables, for data transfer from both of those drives. And those you will run from the drive to one of these as SATA cable slots. And really you just I like to go by number. So I'll start with 1. This is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'll start with 1. And I will run it out to the cable management side. No, it's not long enough for that, so I'm just gonna have to run it straight. We'll see if this other one is longer. No. So we'll just run it up like this. Plug it into the drive. All of the plugs in a computer are pretty dummy proof. On the bright side, they've got tabs and things to tell you where to plug them in, and then how to plug them in properly. That's too tight.
Okay. What about just dropping it down below that?
No, forget about it.
Okay.
This one should be able to go this route because it doesn't have far to travel. Sometimes, depending on how many hard drives or that you're putting in, you may have to go ahead and order a couple of extra SATA cables, or if your motherboard comes with enough of them, then you won't. And then this is our case fan that came with our case. We're going to go ahead and plug it in real quick. Anyway, I would rather have spare cable hanging out here, and I'll just zip tie it later rather than running a cord across the fan. And I'll just take care of that later. Next we'll move on to power switches and some HD audio cables, things like that orient with the front face here. And again, the motherboard is pretty stupid proof, and this says power LED. You look on here and it'll read off what each thing is. And you just plug it in. Hard drive LED. Reset switch. Power switch. And if something ends up hooked up wrong, it's not too big a deal, just because you can It just won't start up if something happens to be hooked up wrong.
I'm over.
And then we've got USB cable that'll hook up to one of these USB ports, whichever one you happen to want to use. Let's just go.
Right here.
Okay. And these ones have blank spots, which coincide with the missing pin on the USB. And then we run our audio to the same thing over here. And that does it for all of our front face. We've got all our drives hooked up, main power supplies, and the rest of the cords are unneeded in this build because we aren't doing a graphics card or anything fancy. So basically now we're down to cable management and putting it all back together. So we'll switch to this side, and we've got all these extra cables. This is our CPU power, and we'll just take it and we'll tuck it along this back edge here to kind of keep it out of the way because it runs a different direction than all the other wires. This guy will just kind of mush up to there. We will take these ones and run them up there, so, and we will use a zip tie to manage them. And pretty much any hole on the case you can use for cable management. It doesn't much matter as long as the motherboard or something like that's not in the way. And then we can take these and fold them up all nice like this. Run a zip tie around them, like so. And all that extra cable can just sit here in this open space. And these ones will go ahead and zip tie down to try and keep them out of the way as well. And you can clip the tails off your zip ties or leave them, it doesn't much matter. If they're on the other side of the case here, I will generally clip them off, but on this side I'm not too worried about it. All the extra cable from plugging in those USBs and speakers, I'll go ahead and just pull out here. Zip tie them to some of the stronger cables to kind of keep the spare over here and out of the way. Take all this extra cable, tuck it in. Then we can grab our side plate. Set it back on, close it up. Some cases have more room than others, unfortunately. But generally, unless you're an IT guy or something like that, you won't be getting into this side. Or if, of course, this is a build for you at your house, you may, when you go to upgrade, get into this side for something. But generally, if you gotta kind of mush it down, it's not too big a deal. Preferably, I like to get cases that don't have that problem and have plenty of room for cable management. But sometimes you just don't have the option. Now that we got those screws back on, that case on, we can turn to this side and see if there's any other wires like this fan wire here that we can take care of. This one, we'll probably zip tie it to itself. We'll take this one and run it along the bottom of that fan. Run it through one of the holes from that fan. And just zip tie it to the fan itself. On the outside, of course, this has no chance of getting into where the blades are. I'll take this one and zip tie it to itself. Make it look nice. And again, because this is the inside, I do go ahead and clip off the tails just so it doesn't have the chance of getting into a fan or anything like that. This spot here is kind of unnecessary and doesn't have to have a zip tie. But I know that I can make it look just a touch nicer if I kind of straighten them all out, zip tie them together. Cable management is one of my pet peeves. I absolutely hate getting into a case and having cords spaghettied all over inside of it. That cable's really stiff, but we'll go ahead and try to get it to kind of tuck out of the way there. And these ones, there's not much we can do there. They're kind of there. But yeah, that wraps up putting the entire build together other than this one panel. We'll go ahead and start it up here in a minute and show you that. Right, so we got it all together, put the screen on. I didn't put any other peripherals on just because I'm not booting to Windows yet. We're just going to turn it on and see if it posts. So we'll go ahead and hit the power switch and see what it does. There we are. Posts up like it should. Next thing to do is to put Windows on, but I'm not going to bore you guys with loading screens, and it's a lot, so that'll wrap this whole build up. We'll see you guys next time.